Hey everyone, welcome to this video about visualizations. A couple of notes before we begin. One, this is one of the few times where Excel and Google Sheets are pretty different about how you create the chart itself. There are some things in this video that are applicable to both, such as maybe the reasoning that goes on behind and how we set up our data for some charts. But for the most part, they're very, very different. And in some ways, Excel does make it easier to create charts, even especially more complicated ones. And then the second point is that actually creating the chart, the few clicks that it takes is pretty straightforward. At least they make it simple for us. But it's the thinking behind the scenes that's harder and the challenging part, and what we will pay some attention to in this video. Though this again is a video strictly for Google Sheet chart creation, and then some of the setup we have to do with some of the charts we want to create. So this data is our flights data. We've added some continents over here, and we already have our total revenue. And the first, just to kick off, we want to see how much money are we making per continent. And to do that, again, it's pretty simple. I'm just going to highlight the two columns that I'm interested in, and then I'm just going to go here and go Insert Chart, and pretty automatically I'll get this thing, which right now seems like kind of a mess, and it is, but let's see how we can make it a little more legible. So we see over here a whole lot of data, and to understand what data Google Sheets pulled out and tried to use to create a visualization, we have to look at the setup over here. So we see it created a column chart, which is good, that's what we wanted. And then it has a couple things over here. The x-axis is important, the x-axis is what's at the bottom, and then the series is just the other data that's relevant for this chart. In particular, we're talking about the y-axis here. So it definitely got the total revenue correct, but then for some reason, instead of putting from C, meaning the continent inside here, it added it to the series label, meaning we don't have an x-axis right now, which is why you see there are no labels here. So that's pretty simple. I can just cancel this and then use from C over here. And that's good, kind of, but you see I have a lot of repetition because in fact what it's doing is it's just looking at every line and then plotting it on this chart. Now we have a couple of solutions. I could make something like this. I could have a count if or a sum if and then start aggregating the stuff myself. But one of the nice things about these charts, by the way, I just double click this chart to open up this panel again, is that it can do some of these operations for you. So I can press this aggregate and you see how now it's combined everything for me, and that's pretty cool. So that was a really easy way to create a chart, and immediately I can see that my flights in Asia are the ones that bring in the most revenue, and Africa seems to be bringing in the least amount of revenue. But there is no built-in way, at least not in Google Sheets, to sort this. That's where I would have to say something like, okay, let's myself create this extra table over here, and then I could use some filters and sorts or whatever I needed to recreate this chart. But otherwise, Google Sheets will just take in the order that it sees it in order to aggregate the data. So that's the basic setup for a really basic graph. There are some customizations you can make, and I highly recommend you look into some of these. Let's take a look at just a couple. Say we wanted to add a title. Remember, mostly visualizations are to communicate something effectively. So it is really important to have titles that make sense, right? So this is what? Revenue per continent, right? And immediately the chart makes a bit more sense. You could also use this drop down over here to say, hey, I'm going to give a title to my horizontal axis, which is over here, which is going to be the continent. But actually, now that I think about it, this is not so indicative, right? This is actually, I chose it from this column, the from, like as in which continents are people flying in from. So what I would actually like this to be is the destination continent, but that means I have to change my data, which is possible. I just have to go to the setup, and you see over here it tells you the data range. And the data range is right now L1 to L1000, which is this guy over here. That should stay the same because I'm still looking at revenue. And then C1 to C1000. So I can change that pretty simply, either by clicking here and changing it. I could also change it directly over here. I could, erase this and just select the column like this, and that's okay. But now I have to kind of redo this because when it said, okay, well, you change the data, let me put the revenue as the x-axis. Obviously that's wrong, so I'll just go ahead, remove that, and redo this, right? So I'll use the to continent for the x-axis, and then it's figured out that it, well, actually, no, sorry, it hasn't figured it out. It's just counted the amounts of flights. It's even, included this 2C, which is the header over here. So you always have to pay attention to what the default options are. So actually what I want the series to be is the total revenue, and then I want to use row 1 as headers, right? In this case it doesn't make a difference, but sometimes it will include some things that you don't want it to, and then it did. Okay, so see, when I say use row 1 as headers, it will look at this row and it will say, okay, these are the headers of my chart. I don't want to put them in as actual, as columns like the other ones. So I'm gonna use row 1, and then that's it. I've got my chart. It's got the headers that I need. I could go in and say, change the chart axis and title, add one for the vertical axis. The vertical axis is this one over here, and call this revenue. And then the chart is about as neat, tidy, and informative as I can create it. So that's really the very, very basics of creating a chart, and you see it's not that hard. And in here it was pretty simple because the data was ready for us and we haven't had to make any manipulations. By the way, you can always change the type of chart over here. It depends, if you want something like a line graph. Here it doesn't make sense. Typically line graphs are used for trends or over time, but just so you know that it's really easy to change the type of chart that you want to use. It's just a question of where's the data coming from and how do you want to represent it. So let's do something a little more interesting where we want to see something like, okay, what are the routes that are most profitable, right? So which routes are bringing in, not profitable, which routes are bringing in the most money? And routes is going to be some combination of from and to. Now I can't do that out of the box, so I'm going to have to create a column here, and I'm going to do it really quick without getting too much into it. Okay, so once I've created that, I'm just going to go ahead and give it some similar formatting. This is going to be some simple text, and then I'm going to drop that down. And really what I've created here is a kind of code which will allow me to recognize each route independently. And then what I can do is, now that I've set up this extra column, I can just take these two guys and again insert a chart, and it will do that silly thing that it does where it says, hey, I'm just going to drop all the data in the chart together, but really again I want to aggregate on the route, and this time it shows the x-axis and the series correctly. I want to aggregate on the route because you see I have these duplicates over here like YOK and Kyoto. So once you aggregate, it comes back to nicely and it groups all the ones together, and immediately I can see that the Philadelphia and Jakarta route is the one that brings in the most money. So that's already a really interesting point that would have been really hard to tell without this chart, right? How else could I have known that specifically the routes that begin at Philadelphia and end in Jakarta, those are the ones that are bringing me more money? So I could have again done these aggregates myself and calculated how much revenue each one is bringing, but the chart really pops it out for you, and then you can see what the lower category ones are. But again, if you do want to sort this, then you're going to have to restructure the data yourself so that you can do the sorts and then recreate the chart. So that's it for the basic ones. And we're going to stop the video here because the next set is a little more involved and will take a bit of time. But make sure you get these foundations, these fundamentals, especially in terms of exploring some of the customization options. So for example, in series, you can always add these data labels, and that will give you, a bit more insight into each one of the data points. In this one, it may not be the best idea because there's a lot of them, so they start to overlap. But sometimes adding a trend line can help. In this case, again, trend line doesn't really make sense because it's not sequential data, meaning this has no dates, and trend line typically come with dates. But just make sure you get a good feel for what's going on here, how to select your data and create simple charts. And in the next video, we'll explore some cooler and more complex ones. See you then.